Well, just before we go into the next segment, let's quickly ask you if you have registered for and picked up your voter card. That's the question of the week, as a matter of fact. We started asking you this question yesterday, and I did say that it's not a question that applies to just you. It's also applying to us presenters. Maybe we'll be asking our guests as well if they've registered for and picked up their voter card. We'll be asking our producers to tell our guests if they have, to perhaps bringing their cards to the studio and showing us. That's just to motivate everyone to be able to get their voter card and know just how serious it certainly has implication for our national life. The fact that we need to exercise our civic responsibility. Have you registered for and picked up your voter card? If you haven't, the answer is right there for you. The steps you can take is right there. You have to visit www.cvr.inecnigeria.org or the nearest INEC office to you. Well, with that out of the way now, do not forget, pick up your voter card, register and pick up your voter card. If you haven't, that's the place to go to, the website to go to, or the nearest INEC office to you. So, Prof, yes, I have another professor here in the studio. Professor Ken Ife is a development economist. You're welcome once again to our studios this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Are you taking this process very seriously? Have you registered for?
Yeah, I have.
You have your voter card?
I do have.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but all of this has a bearing on the economy.
It's a civic responsibility.
Indeed. And the choices that we make at the polls eventually determine our fortunes economically. And there have been questions, even though those who are currently at the Home of Affairs now say, well, we've done our best. We heard just before we started the first segment, Mr. Clem Agba reeling out some of the progress that the administration has made, but you also heard the complaint of Mr. Mude Yusuf that it's yet to really be felt by the real sector. And that disparity continues. We've been told headline inflation is at an all-time high, at almost 17%, is worrisome for many Nigerians. And then I was just asking Professor Pakol whether he thinks that we need to take a second look at the items which are used to determine this GDP growth and also the items used to determine inflation. Because some will argue that it's a lot higher, and perhaps maybe if we took a second look at what is used to measure GDP, maybe we'll get a fair picture of why the average Nigerian is not seeing the growth which government says we're experiencing as a people.
Well, I've looked several times at the broad indices used and the classification of those into 5 broad categories. The headline inflation is a composite price index, which is an aggregation of all of them. And then the food sub-basket index is focusing on the farm gate, and then, of course, processed food. Both of them are in that. Then you have the core inflation, which is all indices, because they all have different focus. All indices put together minus food sub-basket index. And that mirrors the composite index. But in our own case in Nigeria, the food sub-basket index cruises at a very high level, which shows that is the major drag on inflation.
It tells the whole story.
But then the 2 other ones, number 4 and number 5, are the urban sub-index and the rural sub-index. They have still broadly the same categories, but the thing is that the urban tell you more, always higher than the rural, which tells you that is the theater of inflation. Because much of the imported goods, which carry imported inflation, are heading there. And much of the foods coming from rural areas are experiencing transportation barriers and high cost of transportation. So they're all pushing prices at the urban areas. So to go and change these indices, I'm not sure.
You think they already tell the story?
Sorry?
They already tell the story.
They tell the story.
They tell the story as genuinely as people are feeling it.
The thing is this, if you look at the targeting, World Bank was involved in designing this, and it could be very difficult to follow those. I mean, if you look at the thing, they measure cigarettes, bread, basic items, the things we eat, everybody eats, and everybody wears, the clothes they wear. They measure electricity prices. So diversity of things that affect every part of our life.
What about GDP?
Now, the GDP, okay, if you look at the composition of the GDP, the broad compositions are okay. You have the primary sector, which is agriculture, industry, and services. And then you now come to disaggregation of those, which is now take the industry, break it down, petroleum industry, mining industry, then you come to the services, it goes really far, the ICT, telecommunication, all those banking services and all of that. Then the agriculture is, the four subsectors in agriculture, the crop production, the aquaculture, the livestock, and those ones. Obviously, the crop carries over 80% or 90% is overbearing on the agricultural space. So I think the broad classification is standard. We're following international standards.
And the weightings are also standard.
We're using international standards in what we do. And NBS, as I told you, I remember when they were going through that, the lead economist, the Central and World Bank, I was meeting with him, and Nigeria subscribed to the very, to the international standard.
I'm asking this.
And we rebase. What we need to do is to rebase the economy, because we rebase at when Okonjo-Iweala was there in 2012. And I pestered government then, and then because I felt that if we rebase, because the last time was 1999, and telecom sector did not explode by then, and many other sectors, creative and cultural industries, didn't explode. So we rebased, and then we saw a shift of 60%. So, and if we need to rebase now, but there's no guarantee that it's going to have a rise. It may even fall. But we need to rebase. It should be done every 5 years. So we need to rebase the economy right now and then see whether there is a fundamental shift in the base, and then whether we are going to have, because more sectors that have been made. Okay, for example, you may actually see these digital economies. Yeah, they will come stronger. And they're actually giving us more resources. That's where you get the most investment. That's number one in the world in terms of number, in the Africa, in terms of number, and in terms of equity coming in, we are number one. So that will push the figure.
There have been recommendations. Part of the statements we were playing just before they came to this segment, statements that, about the digital economy, that we need to find how we can get it across to all the 774 local government areas of Nigeria if we really want to see an exponential growth in that. Yes, we witness some exponential growth, but it's an enabler. It is small compared to what is possible in that particular sector.
It's an enabler, yes. I mean, remember I chaired the digital economy and bioeconomy and science, technology, and innovation in the National Development Plan. So we had cross-cutting goals that cuts across the three. And then we now moved in to use this to underpin the entire cluster, high-growth clusters, and mapped it across. Because what we're saying is that innovation is applicable to almost every aspect, to all sectors. So there must be innovative ecosystem. So what we're trying to do to identify innovative ecosystem in every MDA, every sector of that subsector of the economy, and then make sure that it drives the innovation in the digital economy and bioeconomy drives growth. That was what. Otherwise, before, what we had was innovation in science and technology as a policy, and it wasn't being mainstreamed. And the second, they didn't have the resources to even, the research institute to even take it to incubation and take it to, so what we did was to take it out and say, okay, look, it has to be a cross-cutting theme. And we have to use that to interface with every high-growth sector, identify the innovation ecosystem there, and that's the approach that we took.
Let's flip this conversation to my colleagues.
Okay, Prof, the mention of the local governments reminded me of something previous guest, Professor Bakol, talked about, and that's, the federal government. And in his words, it says, the federal government is too heavy, and whatever it sits on, it breaks. And I know we have talked about this perhaps for too long, but really, how much of attention do you think we should also be paying to that angle of the conversation, that maybe it's just too big? We're talking rural areas. We have huge population, huge potential there. But clearly, from what we have seen from the figures, it looks like we're not just getting deep, we're not reaching out to them and ensuring their potentials are reached. So what do you have to say to this, conversation about the federal government being too big and whatever it sits on, it breaks?
No, I wouldn't actually go that far, but there is something to be admired if we can, resize the equation, actually, to have more resources and more areas go down to state governments and local governments, and free local governments from the current trapping of their resources by the federal government. But they all boils down to capacity. You need to have the requisite capacity to manage, and then the integrity to deliver the goods. We are lacking on both, without a doubt. So even if you say to the state, carry everything federal is doing, you're going to still find that the capacity to do it and the willingness to do it. So there are lots of issues in our country, but we could do more.
I quickly need to follow up
by devolving some of the functions.
Right. Pardon me, I need to quickly follow up on that capacity question you raised, because it's important to clear this out. So are you saying maybe the local governments and even the subnationals don't have as much capacity to handle these things? But you see little estates here and there, how they sort their security, ensure that their ecosystem works well. So is it really a question of capacity, or just that reluctance to cede, resources, economic power, political power to the subnational levels? Because I don't think capacity is a problem, really.
Well, you could say that, but I probably wouldn't agree that we have. You see, the political system we have has entrenched mediocrity. And so you are not actually getting the best of our best 11 at local level, at the state level, and even at the federal level and various levels. We're not actually giving it our best shot. And then on top of that, you now have inconsistencies arising from governance issues and corruption, all kinds of things thrown on the system. So as P2B was saying yesterday, we just have a mentality of sharing things, just want to share things. And people don't think about saving resources, saving money, and then investing, and then in creating wealth. So that's the dichotomy that we have. And it is eating very deep into our socioeconomic system. We need to begin to find alternative ways of creating vistas of opportunities and challenge the status quo. But first of all, you've got to get competence on the line. There's no way you can do this. Human investment in human resources is abysmal. We should be doing 10% of our budget on education, 10% of our budget on health, 10% of our budget on agriculture. Those are recommendations of African Union. And we're not going anywhere near at all. I think it's about well under 3% on education, and the health is even half of that. And agriculture, some states are doing really well. I know some states that are doing 0.5%, not even 1% on agriculture. And we need to face the reality that the human resource, there are countries in the world like Japan, third biggest power. Tell me what raw materials they have, what natural resources they have. Investment in human capacity, and that is what is creating, that's what made them what they are, today. I mean, there are many economies like that. Okay, look at Nigeria. How many? We've dropped in our education system. Anywhere, look at our, but there are some few of us that are abroad are sending $26 billion into the country, much more than the whole revenue the country earns from oil or government revenue. So can you imagine if we give these children the minimum that they require, say for example, global digital literacy, and are able to work anywhere in the world, even from Nigeria, working for companies in the world, and if they go there, they can find it. You go talking about that remittance multiplying by 4 or 5, in the next 5 years, but we're not addressing that.
Prof.
Not at all.
Some would say 10% to education, 10% to health, 10% to agriculture. 10% of what? 10% of whatever is available.
Their revenue.
And if
the
what
budget,
is available
the budget.
is insignificant, it can't actually address much.
No, he's talking about 10% of their budget. And in fact, even the ECOWAS macroeconomic convergence criteria took it further. There are 10 macroeconomic convergence criteria. One of them says you should not invest less than 20% of your revenue on investment, sorry, not less than 20%, which means it wants it to continue to create jobs by investing in economic activities and production. The second one says don't spend more than 35% on employment. In other words, don't overload the bureaucracy with people that you cannot have enough resources to invest and all that. So there are marks that are there. Of course, there are the macroeconomic ones like single-digit inflation, and there are 10 of them. And then even the borrowing, it says don't owe people. If you owe them, then charge interest in paying them. And that's number 6. So you have all these standards that are actually trying to narrow the gaps between the 15 member states as we move into a single currency.
Well, the point I was trying to make is that even if you met the 10% required allocation, it is 10% of whatever funding that is available. And if the funding that is available is inadequate, then that 10% can't really address much. But that's not where I'm headed, Prof. I'm glad you talked about taking the digital economy to the local government areas, and you have pretty much emphasized on building human capacity. And Professor Kwakol also supported your point, when he appeared earlier, when he talked about producing, the importance of production. But really, Prof, when we talk about production, how far can Nigeria go with production when it has not taken care of the problem of power? Power is significant. The real sector, for instance, makes up 48% of the economy. But if you haven't taken care of the problem of power, whatever economic revolution that you are going to record, wouldn't it be stifled halfway?
Without a doubt, you are absolutely right. The thing is that I keep saying, when you come to per capita of power, Nigeria is 4 times the population of South Africa, and then they have 10 times more power than us, which means there's a factor of 40 times. And then if you look at them with 58,000 megawatts, and Nigeria is still struggling with 5,000 megawatts, look at Brazil, exactly the same population as Nigeria, and they have well over 258,000 megawatts. So you can see how many hundreds of times that are higher than Nigeria. So it does affect. It does affect. There are other ways you can go about it. We made some important mistakes in the past, but we can take power to the mass market so that you can unleash the potential of the private sector to provide power for themselves and then also to sell their excess into the national grid. But it's getting difficult to convince government of this. Everybody that has money and would want to invest in solar would put solar in his village, put in the nearest township, which could be Lagos, and then put in Abuja if that's where he's doing business. But he can only sleep in one place at any one time. So if it is possible for all the power being generated by his investment to go into the national grid and pay him, or even supply to the local people, they should do that. But it's getting it difficult to convince government that you should pay for that meter that takes that power from him. And then you should be able to give him back his money, or even a substantial amount of it. But that hasn't gone in. Even the misalignments in the entire power sector tells you that, explain to me why the man who is generating the power borrows money, borrows to pay salary, borrows to pay for his investment, and then also paying for the gas. But all the power he's generating, he only gets about 25% of the money from discos. It tells you the whole story about the misalignment. 50% of whatever is generated disappears at loss on transmission. It tells you the huge scale. Why should it always be one single national grid? Why couldn't people that could do it do some regional grids? Why couldn't people that could domicile their power to their local area? Why can't they do it? It's a state of emergency so that we can escape this. And then if you are looking at this, I want to tell you something. If you look at Nigeria, Nigeria is the highest tax, implicit tax in Africa. But on paper, we are the lowest. It's because when you look at an employer, he provides power for himself, he does borehole, he does his road and all that stuff. So that's why we're the highest cost location to do business. But at the same time, whilst we are 18% of the Africa population, 18% of Africa GDP, we're actually 48% of entrepreneurship in Africa. We have 42 million out of 90 million MSMEs in Africa. So entrepreneurship is a latent comparative advantage for Nigeria, but we're not matching it with advance in infrastructure. We're not matching it with the ease of doing business. So there's a disconnect.
Well, the question of competence comes back in. That's what you started with, and that's what Professor Kwakol also concluded with earlier. So the question of competence comes in again. Is it the willingness or lack of it on the part of governments to empower the people to develop human capital from the federal level to the local government level, or that of the policies that are not speaking to it? Exactly what would you say is missing in the economic structure of the country to get us out of the doldrums?
What is missing, you see, we have very good policies. Now, when you come to implementation, it collapses. Because part of the challenge in implementation is we have our own priorities. Government has its own priorities when they get money. For example, priority number 1, make sure you pay salaries. That's federal government. 2, make sure you pay pension. 3, make sure you service the loans, and the loans are getting very heavy. Then 4, security, you must invest in security. And then recurrent expenditures take priority. So by the time you come to October, December, they have done 100% on those area and recurrent expenditure. The one that is back on the back burner is capital expenditure. And it's in the capital expenditure that you expect the jobs. So that will be about usually 40%, 50%, then gradually. So to try to increase, they will extend to January to March, expend the budget of the previous year to March, and now expended it to July, just to try to increase the spend on the capital. So you can even argue how much capital has been released this year for this year's budget. The question is that they're scratching their head, telling whether they've got anything or they haven't got anything. So it's difficult. Now, but the second thing is that why are we expecting government to do the things we know the private sector can do better? And that's the investment in human resource, investment in health. It's the private sector that will drive the health, because health means insurance. It's insurance that pays for health in America. You know that. And they expand. You go to UK, it's the same. And then so but we're not energizing, we're not releasing the space for private sector to come. And when they're coming, they have to bring with investment. And investment is the key for any economic development, because it is investment that creates economic activity. The economic activity creates jobs. Jobs give you disposable income. With the disposable income, you can pay for health, education, and poverty reduction. That's the cycle. But we just think that government can do everything. Government hasn't even got the resources to do it. Government's budget is only 7% of the GDP. So we are at the 93%. It's domiciled in the private sector. So we need to shift this argument. And then also, if you look at education, why is education so important? It's because Nigeria represents the bulk of the new workforce globally required. India has gone in. It's Nigeria that should be next, because Nigeria is the next big population following India. Nigeria and Brazil are the same. But we are the ones to provide a workforce for Europe, for America, for Canada, because their workforce is aged completely. Where in the age of below 35%, we have 65% of below 35 years old are 65% of our population, 165 million. But the same 35 years less is about 20% for the Europe. And so we're about 3 times more young people, and we're the ones to educate. That's why you see them doing this, what's it called, lottery or something. You think they're doing a favor. They do need the jobs so that you can come and work to pay the tax for them to maintain the old people that are all over the place. Mm.
Do you see those conversations taking front burner as we go into this electoral cycle, this next electoral cycle?
Yeah, I think this needs to be played up so that the politicians making their promises can catch on with this. And I tell you another thing, just that I still have the opportunity. If you look at the NNPC, if you look at our debt situation and NNPC, where you are, and all this subsidy removal or not removal, or not removing anything, the NNPC does a crude swap, carry the crude to the refiner and get back money. I got back PMS. And if that was enough, giving you enough margin for them to pay for subsidy, they wouldn't be coming back to ask government to go and find 4 trillion. Can you imagine in our economic situation, they are looking for 4 trillion. You go and borrow 4 trillion to subsidize. That's CBN has not received the money. Every month they should be expecting about $3 billion, and they haven't since January last year. And then you see JP Morgan deleting us from overweight category simply because they saw that 3 months ago they haven't received, but they didn't know that they haven't even received anything since January last year. So let's move this company to the market, capital market. Float this company, do an assessment of their asset, because I know based on the 1.7 million barrels a day or 1.6, that company is worth over 25 trillion. When you add the gas assets and physical assets, it will be heading over 35 trillion. Go to the market and ask for 40 or 49% to the people. Let the people buy the shares. What will happen is that you immediately rake over 15 trillion to sort out your debt. And then all the people who are busting the pipes and all of that are going to be shareholders in this company. The big companies and oil companies will be shareholders in that company. That company will become the most efficient company in Nigeria. Just as you have LNG, who complains about LNG? LNG is paying tax.
One quick question. Are you worried? I mean, we've seen all manner of, all different kinds of people, different people, showing aspirations to become Nigeria's president. Did Nigeria's economy take a toll when the CBN governor also? Were you worried about that? Not the declaration now, but the stories that he was also interested in becoming president of Nigeria.
Is he running? I'm not sure that he's running. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. But we have far more critical
I'm just asking if you were worried, and if that had any effect on the market. Did it
I haven't seen any effect on the market, to be honest, because Nigeria has that capacity to regenerate itself in any time of crisis. But let me tell you, we need to do with the structural factor. If we talk and talk and talk over the problem, we will never get to the problem. I've just given you something that we need to do on NNPC to actually make sure that we'll not only solve our debt problem, we'll stop more hemorrhage on our budget, and we'll stop more borrowing, but then get asset-based financing. That is what we need. Because everything we do is borrow, and you have very little talk about how much of your assets are you leveraging. And we need to leverage. And that's what Saudi Arabia did. They needed $25 billion. They didn't go to IMF.
Prof, we have to thank you so much this morning. I know that we can keep talking about these solutions. Thank you so much for coming on this morning. Professor Ken Ife is a development economist.
Thank you very much.
We'll take another moment. Now we're back to talk about another topic entirely. When we come back from this break, please stay with us.